It was at the age of 66 that I picked up a paintbrush and started painting my first acrylic painting. And after 2 weeks of painting hours and hours every day, I actually sold my first painting. I had no idea that I had any kind of hidden art talent inside me, not until after I retired. So I'm wondering, maybe you have some sort of a hidden talent that you haven't explored yet. Maybe it's art and maybe it's something else. I had no background in art. I had no college degree. So you want to know how I learned to paint? As my husband likes to tell the story, my wife attended the University of YouTube. I watched hours and hours of tutorials on how to paint with acrylics. And after retirement, I realized I have a lot of time on my hands that I didn't have when that job got in the way. So I had to find things to do with my time. And there were some art teachers on the small island that my husband and I lived on. So I started signing up for these art classes. I thought that would be a fun thing to do. I signed up for the drawing class and I did okay, but it just really wasn't quite my thing. I signed up for watercolor painting. That wasn't my thing either. I couldn't seem to leave it alone, and all I'd end up with was a muddy mess of water and paint. Then I tried oil painting. That wasn't my thing either. I didn't have the patience for oil painting because you have to wait a long period of time for things to dry before going to the next step. I was a little bit discouraged, and those were the only art classes that they offered. I got to thinking about it one day that my daughter-in-law had kind of dabbled in acrylic paint. So I looked it up on YouTube and found that there are a lot of tutorials for acrylic paint. So I hopped on the computer and I ordered a starter kit from Amazon. And as I was waiting for that starter kit to arrive, I started watching YouTube tutorials on how to paint with acrylics. I couldn't wait to get started. I had a lot of bad canvases for sure, and a lot of those old canvases got painted over as practice boards to start something new. And I fell in love with the acrylic painting for several reasons. One was that acrylic paints are so forgiving. If I make a mistake and I realize it, I can go in there with a paintbrush and I can scrub that paint off real quick. And then I can repaint over there, fix that mistake. Or if I discover after it dried, I can go ahead and paint over top of it. So acrylics are really very forgiving. I saw a quote that I liked by Van Gogh, and it said, "Success is sometimes the outcome of a whole lot of failures." And I had a lot of failures, but I did go on to paint a lot of things, and I started selling those paintings. I started painting in February of 2017. And by September of 2017, I had a booth at the Art in the Park. And I sold a lot of paintings at that Art in the Park too. So it really gave me a lot of encouragement that people were actually interested in my work. And then I was really stoked, really surprised when an acquaintance came up to me and she said, "Esther, why don't you think about teaching some paint sip classes? I would love to take your classes." And my first thought was, oh no, that's not for me. I couldn't do that. And she said, "Sure you could." And I said, "But there's another gal that does paint and sip classes on the island here, and it's a small island. I don't want to step on toes." But this acquaintance said, "You wouldn't be stepping on toes because you both paint so differently. You have different styles, and I love the way you paint." Well, she talked me into starting it. So when it came time for that first class that I'd scheduled there on the island, I had a totally full class. And from that point on, I had 2 to 3 classes in my home on the island. We moved off the island 5 or 6 years ago, and I've continued to do paint and sip classes in my home on an occasional basis. I don't do it for the income. I do it because I love to see the excitement on their face, the satisfaction that they get when they see, wow, I really can do this with a little help. I've heard many times when people hear about my class that would say, oh, I would so love to take your class, but I can't even draw stick figures. My response, well, that's okay, because we're not going to be painting stick figures anyway. And I'm going to help you every step of the way. So it is really fulfilling to me to see how somebody can be so excited of their masterpiece there in front of them. You should kind of forget about the world all around you, all of your troubles, all your woes, and you just focus on what it is you're painting, what your subject is. I paint for the pleasure, and I paint to help others realize that they really can do this too. And since I started at the age of 66, I know that whatever your age, you are never too old to start painting. And of course, the painting is at its ugly stage right now because it just looks like a blob of black and brown paint there. So when I use the palette knife, the paint is so thick that I tend to use a hair dryer to dry it. And when I'm teaching a 3-hour class, I also have hair dryers available because usually I don't teach palette knife in a class, but it still speeds up the process as everybody is painting and we're able to dry their paintings in between. And I just go over a little bit to kind of dry that in between stages. And this is at that stage that I said, sometimes you want to just throw it in the trash because it looks like just a blob of paint that's never going to materialize into any kind of a masterpiece. And now I'll go in and start filling in a little more detail, putting in a little more of these shadows. And I always have to teach a reasonably simple, usually normally a landscape painting that we can get done for a full class in 3 hours time because my classes are always 3 hours long. When I have these stretch canvases, I always paint along the sides of them too because the stretch canvases can get pretty expensive to try to frame them. So if you paint the sides, and I still need to do the top, if you paint the sides, then you don't have to put it in a frame. You can just put some hooks or a wire or something on the back in order to hang them. So this is the end result of just an afternoon of enjoying painting. And I also decided that I had so much time since I didn't have that job to go to that I could do other things. I had had a guitar my entire adult life, and I always decided someday I'm going to learn to play this. And when I got older and older, I thought, when I retire, I'll learn to play. And to my good fortune, I married somebody who played a guitar. So he started teaching me how to play. And I learned enough that I could play a number of songs, never quite to sing and play too. And then he wanted to try a ukulele. So I bought him a ukulele for his birthday one year. And I discovered that it was easier for me to get my fingers around. So then I got a ukulele for myself, and I started teaching myself how to play the ukulele, and that was a lot of fun. And then in 2020, my husband had suggested that I write a memoir for my kids, my grandkids. And I thought, no, I won't do that. But long story short, I did go back to the University of YouTube and started watching hours and hours of writing coaches. And I'd had legal writing behind me, but never creative writing. And so in 2024, I actually published my memoir. So the other thing that I challenged myself at was my husband again talked me into starting to sing with him. And now he and I own a karaoke business. So I sing in front of hundreds of people. You're my bread when I'm hungry. All that to say, not to be tooting my own horn by any means, but I tell you this to say, just because you're 50, 60, or beyond doesn't mean that you can't still challenge yourself to be creative. Find those hidden talents within yourself. I'm Esther. If this was something that is encouraging you to start challenging yourself, then hit that subscribe button down below. You know the one. And follow along, because my channel is all about living with confidence, with courage, and with curiosity. So comment below. Tell me, what have you been curious about in your retirement? What hidden talents have you uncovered? Let me know. I'd love to hear.